as with so many conflict questions, we're talking about a lot of complexity. And I think there are other agendas of tension which overlap the ICC intervention in Uganda tension. And one of those is that something we've talked several times today was about the question of ownership of agenda, the tensions between the imposition of international agendas and the sense of local ownership and local concerns. And I also think, lastly, that we talk about defending the human rights space, or we talk about defending the humanitarian space, but I think there is also there's a poor cousin of those spaces, and that is the space for peacemaking, which is equally difficult to defend. And I think that there's another issue at play here about how those three spaces get defended, and the third one doesn't get defended very well.
Okay, I'm very concerned about impunity, and it's something which comes up again and again. My definition of impunity is somewhat wider than just looking at big-time war criminals, or whatever we're calling people. It does, and I suppose my experience is that in a post-conflict situation, that the attention on war criminals is out of all proportion to the attention which is on the reintroduction of a legal system within which people can trust and provide security.
Yes, we have one here.
I remember when the ICC had just started picking interest, even people in northern Uganda really welcomed it. They thought the ICC was their savior because they have been suffering for 2 decades, and the international community has just been looking on. And the government has also been looking on. It has been unable to get these rebels. People's lips have been mutilated. Young girls have been raped. The LRA is 80% of the LRA is made up of young boys, children, basically. And these children, their parents are either in the community or they were killed. So the situation is that bad. Now, the people they knew now by the coming in of the ICC they expected it to come also with some kind of international force to go and arrest these people in the bush. Unfortunately, it dawned on them that ICC was just a court like any other court, and they were going to rely on the same military structure to go and arrest those people, which had failed to do it for 20 years, unfortunately.
I mean, if we're talking about justice mechanisms in situations like northern Uganda, like Sierra Leone, who consulted the people? You know, did the people request these transitional justice mechanisms? Were these appropriate for us? And as he said, these international mechanisms are supposed to be measures of last resort, but absolutely in our cases they were not. They were just a product of international arm twisting of our government, because our governments were never in a position to negotiate what we wanted as people in our respective countries, because we were coming from war. We wanted all the aid, we wanted America to help us and all of that, and they said, okay, if we're going to help you, then you're going to have this and this and this. In Sierra Leone, with the Lome Peace Accord, which you referred to, which eventually brought about the peace, the fighting forces agreed for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But I'll tell you what, after they agreed and the process started, we started consultations all over the country. And then the government apparently was forced into requesting for, first of all, a special court for Sierra Leone from the UN. And then the UN came in and said, okay, the government has requested this, but we're going to try it's not going to be a victor's court. So they're trying also people within the government, the civil society, civil defense forces, which were very popular, and people thought these were like our redemption forces. So
that if people who were victims become empowered in the process of the immediate post-conflict reconstruction processes, and their means of livelihood, they can live sustainably, they can have a sustainable livelihood, that their grievances and fears recede into the past. Whether justice in that context would not be seen to have been done. And I think that what we should be looking at is legal justice or social justice in the context of addressing those real and structural causes of the conflict that led to the conflict, that allowed grievances to be mobilized by merchants and exploiters in the first place? What were those things that led to that? And how can we address that in the post-conflict situation so as to prevent a recurrence of conflict? I think that that's the real issue for me.
I think that sometimes some of when we use the instruments of sanctions or the instrument of the ICC prosecutions, that they're both blunt and they can sit heavily over a process. Same way that you might say the terrorist listing or prescription. You know, it can have the influence of, you know, of being an incentive or a disincentive for certain actions. But once it's issued, it just sits over the process. And I think that these indictments sit over this process and are clearly have been debated within the Juba talks and are not yet. That problem has not yet been surmounted. And in fact, at first, there was some question whether or not peace process would even be legal. And amongst the donor communities, they weren't sure if they could touch it, if they could give aid to anybody who was participating. And there was a very thoughtful paper written by a Ugandan lawyer who works part of his time here in the UK, Barney Afako. There was a paper called It's Not a Crime to Talk.
Perhaps in certain local contexts, there are compromises that need to be made. And maybe the ICC says we will suspend the warrants of arrest for 1 year, given that these measures of accountability, of a national process of reconciliation, accountability that meets these requirements that are locally informed, will be suspended for a year, reviewed in a year's time, and if it's being met, will be suspended for another year. So maybe, perhaps there's a way for it to sit heavily on the process in a positive way, is what I'm trying to say.
The woman in blue, did you have
wondering if you could give some feedback on how you think Gacaca has gone or is going in Rwanda. Short question, long answer, I'm sure.
So the short answer to the Gacaca question in 30 seconds is I think that utilizing Gacaca in the wake of genocide was exactly the kind of innovative, creative response that we need to start looking at. In my mind, it was a step in the right direction in terms of thinking creatively about genocide in the wake of mass atrocity. I mean, if they had pursued prosecutions in Rwanda with a judicial system of 12 people after the genocide, it would have taken them 2 centuries. The ICTR wasn't, you know, is pursuing justice for a handful of people. You can't allow genocidaire just to, I mean, you can't move a country forward after that kind of atrocity. So, a step in the right direction, just done in a very problematic way.